All right, so this is just a quick kind of overview of career evolution and just kind of looking back at my own career path and trying to figure out like what are some of those big steps that took place in my own career to try and help others do a little bit better themselves. So as mentioned, I'm a SANS instructor. Today, I'm an engineering manager at Meta, which means I work with Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, all these big properties on the internet, and I've seen and done a lot of different things. And I say that not to toot my own horn, but to share that I have a pretty extensive background, and these are the things that I did to get me here. So I'm trying to share things that might be able to help you accelerate your career, whether that's making your career go faster, finding a different path that might better suit your interests, or just sharing some stories and answering questions. On the Q&A topic, I won't be doing Q&A live here, so we'll be doing Q&A in Slack following the chat. So feel free to ask questions in Slack, and I will definitely get to those. And with that, I'm just one person. So I have my own path that I've walked, I've experienced a lot, but it's just one path. It's not necessarily a great path, a bad path. It's just the path that I took. So if you don't have the same background, the same story as I do, that's cool. It's just a different path. And these are my opinions, not necessarily fact. When I reflected on my own history, kind of looking to see what it is that I thought did really good for me and some of the things I thought didn't do so great, these are the things that I thought really helped accelerate and elevate my own career. So not necessarily the playbook that everyone uses, and that's okay. Now, I broke this talk up into two sections. So some technical nerd skills, if you will, things that we can learn to help grow our career that are technical in nature, things that we can learn pretty easily, whether it's reading books, watching videos, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. This is some of those hard skills. Now, the first most obvious one is really Linux. Linux is massive, and it always continues to surprise me how few people have a lot of experience with Linux, or any experience really. A lot of the work that we do does happen in the Windows world, right? That's cool. That's where our humans are at. That's where they do things that cause problems. But a lot of the server side, a lot of those core infrastructure, that runs on Linux. Looking at ZDNet, they're saying 96% of the top million web servers are running on Linux. That's a pretty massive footprint that dominates. This seems to be a rare skill. And if you can learn Linux, understand the inner workings, like some of those like deep artifacts, the way things work, you can become a valuable resource. And I think that this is one of the areas where I've been able to shine in my own past, just taking a look at Linux, things that people aren't familiar with, getting familiar with and comfortable myself. Kind of extend that a little bit. This is where you can get a lot of remote connectivity, a lot of remote impact. Being able to connect to things very far away without a graphical interface is going to empower you to do a lot more things. And this is how our adversaries work. So understanding this core technology and ways that you can leverage for good are a huge, huge win. And on that, the command line, whether it's Linux command line or even the Windows command line, my own preference is Linux, of course, but Windows has a command line as well. And we've got PowerShell, which is not at all my superpower, but using that command line allows us to amplify what we are able to do. So if we're looking at Linux, talking about things like awk, sed, grep, piping things from one command to the next command, the output into the input of the next command, it allows us to do a lot of powerful text manipulation. And then when we add loops into that, we're able to do things repetitively. So we're able to feed in a variable and go through, say, 100, 1,000, a million lines of items and pull out interesting artifacts or do repeatable commands. There's all kinds of powerful stuff that comes from that. And I think earlier on in my career, when I learned about loops and text manipulation, I still remember, it's not to promote too hard, but it's that SANS promise of like, I literally learned this, went back to work the next day and had something come in that fit that bill. And it was really, really cool to pull out this new skill and shine. So just very cool stuff. So on SSH, proxies, tunnels, and shells, whether it's humans interacting with the shell, just like you would, or whether they're setting up proxies and tunnels to pop out in different places or tunnel through, say, a compromised host into the internal network. So understanding all of this stuff is extremely helpful. And it happens, and all this stuff tends to happen in the Linux side of things, a little bit more than Windows, I would say, but it does happen. All right, and then on to security engineering. So security engineering is really building and scaling security. So the ability to build it, and I'm thinking more from a developer type of perspective, more so than like a core security perspective, like building things that can scale to thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of systems. That takes a little bit different spin on our core security skill set. It's going to take more of a engineering type of skill set. Think of like computer science oriented type of stuff. But it's that same engineering that's going to allow us to automate away some of the nonsense that we have to deal with as security engineers. So looking up domains, seeing if a hash exists, we all do it. But if we have a tool that can automate a lot of that stuff, or we can build the tool that automates a lot of that stuff, it takes all that off our plate and allows the human beings to use their brains to do more valuable work, things that are going to be more impactful. And so just a quick plug for the Practical Threat Detection Engineering. This is a book that came out, I think, just about 2 months ago. So Megan Rohde wrote this, and I haven't read it cover to cover yet. I've gone through some sections. It's a really fantastic reference to some of the stuff that I'm talking about in the technical section here today. So if it's out, if you haven't seen it, it's definitely a great read. All right, and then the big scary one, at least for a lot of the folks I talk to, learn code. Seriously, it's awesome. I went through my whole career until a couple of years ago thinking it's a nice to have. It really is a nice to have. And I think I've seen some of the largest things out there. And what I've learned is that it's not a nice to have in some of these larger environments. It's an absolute must. You must be able to write code in order to be effective to do things. As our networks get bigger, as our environments get bigger, if we have, say, years ago, we'd have, say, 10,000 or maybe 50,000 hosts. Now there's environments out there that go into the millions. Like, you can't really, do much unless you're able to automate and like code that out. So it is a super important skill, and I think it's going to become more and more common in our field. And again, it's just something that I've learned over the years of, I originally was a stickler for the command line, so I just write bash scripts. But eventually I had to learn Python in order to make my code more modular and use libraries. Excuse me. It's a fantastic skill. So while you might not need it today, I highly recommend learning this. And I just think year by year by year, as I go along through my career, some of the people that I think are the most, high level employees, they're able to do some, kind of amazing things in the field. All of them are doing it through writing code. So it's a really important skill to learn. And it's not nearly as scary as I feel it was a decade or two ago. So really important thing to build out your core skill set and capability there. It's not going to be a nice to have for too much longer into the future. All right, log analysis. We all have to do a lot of log analysis. So whether that's just getting all the logs together, aggregating that stuff, normalizing, enriching, the ability to search all this stuff. So, and I'm talking about things at scale. So, aggregating terabytes of logs is no small task for the most part. So learning to do log analysis at scale is definitely a superpower in any sort of incident response or security operations type of area. And I don't just mean going through the text files with my favorite loops and command lines. Those are good for real quick tactical things. But if you're able to load this stuff into a database and run SQL queries, there's a couple tools out there, like Microsoft Log Parser will do that on a host or a small set of logs. And that's cool. But when we start to talk big, we're going to talk about bigger database, whether that's, MS SQL, Oracle databases, things like that. I don't think I can call Elastic the new hotness anymore. It's been around for quite a while at this point. However, that's one of those de facto standards is the Elastic Stack, or formerly known as the ELK stack. That has a Elasticsearch as its backend, and we can load in a tremendous amount of logs and have dashboards, visualizations, click and explore all that stuff, as well as go through and search all of that raw stuff. Now, Elasticsearch is one of those really cool things that took me about a month just to get it to run in the first place. And then to build anything, even at a reasonably usable scale, I think was another month or two. So there's quite the learning curve there. If you want to take a more tactical look at that, consider looking at something like SOFELK, SOF-ELK. It's a distribution that Phil Hagen's made probably pushing 7-ish years ago. It really removes that learning curve and makes it something that's usable out of the box. That's a really powerful tool built on a really powerful capability to do log analysis at scale. And one of my favorite ones, this is kind of how I got into security in the first place, to be honest. I just wanted to be a hacker. So I just wanted to learn how to like break into things and, be the mischief maker. And I took a bunch of classes. I had a couple of roles doing this type of work. And, for me personally, I found it disappointing. The attacker wins every time. That's not very challenging. It just didn't connect with me. Like, I don't enjoy winning every time. I want a challenge. So when I went to the defensive side, I actually learned that knowing the offensive is incredibly useful. So understanding the kill chain, the process from start to finish, it all looks the same. They have to start in a particular area. They have a couple things to do in the middle, and they're all sequential. You can't skip around, jump around for the most part. So understanding the process as a defender, when I'm looking through an intrusion and I see the types of tools, the activities they're doing, I understand where they're at in their intrusion. So it's a super interesting thing to bring to the table that, in my own opinion, a lot of people don't have. So it is a unique and powerful skill. On top of that, when you learn how to be the attacker, you also get to use the attack tools, and you get a feel for what everything looks like. So on the defensive side, you get a feel for all those artifacts as well. Attackers don't tend to have a very good grasp on the artifacts that they leave behind. They know how to use their tools to do the thing they need to do. Just like we are not offensive people, they're not defensive people. So they really don't understand the artifacts that they leave behind for us to find. And of course, this isn't a blanket, every single attacker. However, the vast majority of them is my own experience. All right, so if we switch over to social side of things, the people skills, I personally think that these are a lot harder. And again, it's probably just my opinion, or totally could be, but people skills are just as important as those technical skills. And I would argue they're probably harder to learn. Now, first and foremost, neither is a team sport. I'll tell you, you don't know it all. I don't know it all. And neither does anyone else on this podcast or anywhere else. It's a team thing. We just can't do all of this work alone. Kind of building off the last presentation, you will burn out. I've been there, done that, and I am only one human being. There's only 24 hours in the day. I can only work so fast, so hard. There's, I have to eat and shower and sleep. You can only do so much. You can only learn so much. Make friends. So get to know your coworkers, get to know people in the industry that you can kind of lean on for some help. And build some of these working relationships, whether it's coworkers, people that you're in the office with, which I highly recommend becoming friendly with. Mostly because if you end up in a war room, or I think the concept of war room is familiar, but if you end up in a small room with a bunch of people 24 hours a day, basically for weeks on end, things are going to get crazy if you don't have a friendly working relationship. They usually get crazy anyhow, but that just makes it worse. So it's absolutely a team sport. So rely on other people. Don't hesitate to reach out, ask questions. Try and do it as a team, not as an individual. You just won't be successful. And on that, communication and transparency. This is how we do things as a team. One of the things that I learned is I generally tend to think in my head, that little voice, right? And as I've grown in my career, thinking out loud has proved incredibly valuable over and over and over again. Just talking about what I'm thinking, other people around, paying attention, or part of a group, whether we're sitting in a conference room talking about whatever it is we're working on, think out loud. Other people will challenge your assumptions. Like just recently, I was in a chat with someone who said, "Oh, we just can't do that in prod." And I thought about it for a second. I said, why not? Why do you think we can't do that in prod? And the person thought about it for a second and said, well, historically, this and that, and they provided some justification, which I'm not saying is wrong, but just kind of challenging that assumption. We went and checked some of those things and came back and yeah, we totally can do this. So just thinking out loud, and maybe it is an assumption and you don't know it. So maybe you think something is true and perhaps it's not. Things change often in our field. So thinking out loud, having people challenge you, you challenging others, is going to lead to a better result. Also ask questions. I don't know it all, again. So just as an example, SQL. I can do some basic SQL commands. I do pretty good with SQL for the average user, right? But I'm not a SQL guru. If it goes too much deeper than some basic select statements or even too far beyond joins, I'm going to go find someone who knows SQL better than me and ask them, because I could spend the next 6 hours banging my head trying to get a statement to work, or I can ask someone who can knock it out in 10 seconds because they know it better than me. One of them is a way better option for overall effectiveness. So don't be afraid to ask for help, ask questions, lean on people who know something, whether it be a niche thing better than you or not. And you'll probably be that person that has more experience or knows more, that I invite people to openly solicit questions like, hey, if you have any questions on this, please let me know. You'll see that at the end of this talk. So always seek feedback, try and learn what others are receiving, what they're hearing, so you can adjust your message as necessary. So also understanding bias and motivators. For the longest time, and it just seems so naive to me at this point, I kind of thought everyone was like me. They're not. So not only are they not like me, but they want other things. They have other motivators. So understanding what drives other people, what it is that they want, or why they want it, can be incredibly valuable. I wouldn't make a good lawyer because I'm advertising transparency. I think you should sit down and talk to people and tell them what you are thinking, tell them what you're trying to achieve. And here's the twist. Ask them, try to figure out what, just plain out ask them what they're trying to achieve, what their biases are, like, why do you want this or why do you not want me to do this thing? And I can tell you, like, I've had time and time again, we're literally just sitting down with someone for a half hour, an hour over coffee or adult beverages or whatever, can solve problems because we just talk about what it is, on one side or the other. And it allows us to come to better, compromises essentially. If I understand what the other group or the other person is trying to achieve, and I reflect on my own, we can often come to some pretty solid compromises. So I definitely am a proponent of just talking it out with folks so you can better understand what drives people. The person in particular that you're working with trying to achieve some, seemingly common goal, right? And then track and validate your assumptions. So this one has gotten me over and over again, and it still does every once in a while. Every time I make an assumption during an investigation or during a conversation, we'll stick on the career side of thing, I like to keep track of the things that I'm assuming because they're not always true. So if I keep a list of these things, then I have the opportunity to go back and challenge those assumptions, make sure that they're actually true. And my example here is I was working on an intrusion a number of years ago where our evidence just didn't seem very solid. Like, it had gaps in it, like huge ups and downs in the volume. It just didn't seem to be what we would expect. And so we went back to the system owners and asked them, like, hey, we're seeing some weird things in the logs, like wonky data flows, inconsistencies, what's going on? And they said, nope, it works. Like, okay. And so we followed on, we jotted it down as a note of like, hey, let's go back and check this thing later because it just doesn't seem like on track. And we did. So we went back, we finished the investigation, went back to check all of our assumptions. And one of those things was, does this data actually exist somewhere else? Can we make sure that it's actually good? Because we were looking at it in our aggregation spot. So we went back to the source host and we noticed that a lot of the source hosts were gone. This was an elastic type of a system. And I'm not talking about cloud or anything like that. It was an in-house type of an elastic thing. And so this particular system, when it scaled down, we were told that the systems wiped themselves and they were just plain bare metal ready to provision again for whatever next thing they come up for. And so when we went and checked this, just to be sure, we actually learned that those get provisioned on the spin up, not the spin down. So it turned out there are hundreds of hosts out there with evidence that we needed that wasn't located in our aggregation point, and everyone thought it was gone, but we found it because we challenged these assumptions. And the end result of that is we were able to multiply our impacted users by about 10 times. So it was a pretty massive win for literally just checking that something works the way that we're told it works. And it's happened time and time again, not necessarily on, it doesn't work that way. That's kind of surprisingly common, but checking those assumptions because they're not always quite what we understand. And winning is really a compromise game. So winning is not dominating. I've found this over and over again in security, because security is generally at odds with whatever it is someone else is trying to do. So it's that business side of things versus securing that business properly. So winning is usually finding an amicable compromise where we're both getting the key things that we need, but nobody's really getting everything. So sometimes that's a little ugly in the sense that you have to give a little more than you're comfortable with, but sometimes that's because you're able to use compensating controls. So figure out what you were able to do, what you can agree on, and then take those gaps and go, so socialize that around. See if you can find some other system, some other type of data that you can use in order to supplement the ground that you had to give up in order to get that particular compromise. So if you think about what business your company, your organization is in, it's probably not security. I mean, the only company I can think of that are in the security business is consultancies, right? But just say you work for a telephone company, for example, they're not in the security business. They're in the business of providing phone service to people. So if you want to do something that is, a security task that's going to make business harder, they're not going to be very cooperative. So that's where you need to, understand those bias, those motivators, understand what you can or cannot get done in order to do better as a whole, and kind of grow that capability. All right, and be realistic about stuff. Oftentimes I find that a lot of folks in our field are either overly optimistic or overly pessimistic. And I'd say that I have been on both ends of that personal spectrum. I think I started super optimistic in this field. Security is awesome. It's so much fun. I'm going to go out there and like crush it. And then you start to hit walls. So being overly optimistic isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you should know your limits, understand what's realistic, what you can actually accomplish based on reality, not based on, hypotheticals, having a plan for, if the project goes well, if it underperforms just a little bit. Don't be overly optimistic and promise everything to everyone all the time. That's going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to underperforming. It's going to lead to a lot of negative things. So make sure that your optimism isn't dialed up too high. And on the flip side of that, there's pessimism, right? Don't be the naysayer all the time. I know this is security, and oftentimes it feels like that's our job, is to say no and, be negative about stuff. But come from a partnership perspective. Try and, enable people to do things secure really easily. So balance that pessimism out of like, oh, it's going to be awful, or, it's going to be terrible. Like, we just can't do that. Like, no, no, no. Understand the limits there. And like, you just can't do that. You're not going to be around very long because you're stopping everything. So be able to make those compromises, understand what's going on. And, I think it's important to come from a humble position. So don't come in, because this just never goes well, at least in my experience. Come in being the person who knows everything, the person who's going to make all the decisions. Come in with a partnership mindset, sit down, talk to folks, get to know them, understand what's going on, and where they're coming from. Some of the prior slides there, be humble, like be ready to flex and things like that. Because remember, for the most part, nobody's really here to wreck things. They're not trying to make your life difficult. They're not trying to make security fail. That's just not what people do, other than the adversary. Most people have best intent. So even if it comes off wrong to you, it might just be you. It might just be the other person and the way that they communicate and how that reflects, in how you hear that. But try and remember that everybody is coming from best intent. They're all trying to do the best thing for the group, the company, the team. And sometimes it just takes a third party to like be a little bit neutral of a voice there and perhaps correct some words, change some words to be, to better reflect what the actual situation is. So most people are coming from a good place, even when it feels like they're not. So sometimes it's best to try and find some neutral party to help, moderate the conversation, just to make sure things are going as planned. And also, always be learning and growing. This field is amazing. Things change so fast, and I think this is kind of how I got addicted to it. You'll never know it all. You can learn something every day, probably more than one thing. You'll still never come close to knowing everything. It's just there's such an immense amount of information to know that hypothetically, even if you did know it all, by the time you learn it all, it's all going to be outdated and has changed probably several times. So it's fascinating. It's, it's a lot to keep up on. And that's where you have to approach this as a team. Get to know people, build a community around you, or join a community if there's one available. So everything is always changing. We'll never know it all. It's pretty wild. But I encourage folks to just be curious, ask questions. I ask a lot of questions. And sometimes it's to provoke folks to think about or question some of their assumptions. And other times I'm just curious. I want to know. I think of, someone asked me a question today and I said, well, here's my thoughts on it. Here's my opinion. And I'm just curious, like, why do you want to do this? Why are you asking? And just kind of trying to figure out what's going on there. But just be curious and ask questions. And I think you'll be surprised with, people want to open up, they want to talk. And also their responses, they're not always what you would anticipate to come back. So always be learning, always be growing, be curious, ask questions, and understand that people are going to make mistakes. We are a mistake powerhouse. So people are going to make mistakes. And when they do make mistakes, I think it's culturally super important to extract the lessons learned. I screw up, and when I do, I tell everyone about it. And that's kind of what my SANS class is all about. Let me tell you about the time I screwed this up so you don't do it. It's kind of a parade of stories about how to do things better than I did it when I learned it in the first place. So share that information, help others learn from your mistake, share it widely, and never place blame. So things happen, so they just do. And I don't find it useful or helpful to place blame, because then people aren't going to want to share what they screwed up on, because people are going to point the finger, laugh, and get in trouble or whatever it is. So never do that, because it doesn't foster the rest of the things that are going to provide a positive outcome at the end. And support and grow others. As an engineer, I found this wall a number of years ago where I just was burned out. I was tired. I worked all day, every day. I was on call literally every day of the year. I was just tired. And I sat back and thought about it one night, and I thought, God, there's nothing, I'm never going to dig myself out of this hole. There's no way. How do I replicate myself? Not that I'm the de facto best ever or anything like that, but how do I multiply my impact? How can I do more with the same amount of energy or the same amount of time? And that's kind of where I came across the idea of becoming a manager. So, I started as an engineer, as an individual contributor, and I got asked to switch to a management track probably 6 or 7 years or so ago. And I'm still an engineer, at least in my opinion. I'm not as good of an engineer as I once was. I've been a manager for a while. But my goal in going into the management track was to help other people. If I can provide a little guidance, let's just say, we have 40 hours a week, right? So if I have 10 people and I give them all 4 hours a week of my time, I'm still working 40 hours. But if I'm helping everyone else do better work in their 40 hours, I'm kind of 10xing the things that I'm getting done. So, fuzzy math here, but I'm able to amplify my own impact by helping others figure things out, giving them my thoughts of I don't know the answer, but here's what I would do to try and figure it out and take that to the next step. And sometimes they go off and try that. Sometimes they try something else. Sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm wrong. So it's just the ability to impact others and where they're going, and stepping back myself from being the doer into helping others learn and grow themselves. So trying to develop that next generation of folks out there, which we all know this industry is grossly understaffed. There's not even close to enough people in the field. And some of the statistics from the last presentation shocked me, about 50% of leaders leaving, 25%. Oh my, we need thousands of percent growth, not loss. So it's very saddening, and I hope to help change that by helping people to manage this stuff. And again, as a manager, having been there, done that, lived that life, that's one of the things I do is try and keep my eye out for burnout and like negative reflections in order to help people step back, take a break, and kind of, recalibrate themselves, just effectively stop them from doing what I did in burning out. So that's kind of where I'm going. In the sense of questions, there's no live questions for this one. We're going to do questions in Slack. So feel free to put any questions in there. I'll take a quick look and see if there's any here in just a second. I've got my email up there, my LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me, like connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message. Seriously, I am an open resource. I would love to talk to anybody about anything, whether it's technical, career growth, anything here. I would be more than happy to chat with you about. Let's see. Taking a look at the questions. There's a lot of questions. Hold on. Or a lot of comments anyhow.
We've got a question for you, Brian. If you just want to take one before we roll out, I thought it was a good one. How do you have any ideas on how you engender curiosity? What if you have someone that works for you that how do you get them to be more curious?
Hey, that's a great question, Chad. And if it's proxied from someone else, thank you. How do I get them to be more curious? I gotta admit, I haven't thought about that before. So, I'm just thinking, why? Like when I speak with folks, like if I'm in a one-on-one or things like that, how I get to some of this stuff is I just ask why. And I'm not trying to be a 2-year-old, like why? But if I hear why and it expressed kind of like the curiosity there, perhaps I better understand. And for me, it's just been a natural thing, I think. I've always just been trying to figure things out to better understand them so I can better do whatever it is I'm trying to do. But yeah, I think I would just, encourage folks to ask why, to, kind of foster the conversation and elicit some of these characteristics.
And I imagine it's also cultural, creating that environment where it's okay to ask why, to not know everything. I've definitely been in situations where ego was in play and people just felt like they weren't allowed to kind of explore things. That's also probably a part of it.
And I mean, honestly, I like to qualify stuff. Like if I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'm not 100%, I add that. I'm pretty sure this is the answer. However, I'm not 100%. Here's where I would go look it up, or I'll go look it up and come back. But like, yeah, it's okay to qualify stuff like that, at least in my own environment or culture. So, hit the button. So yeah, fostering a culture that's supportive of that type of thing is absolutely important.